due to climate change in different parts of the world. Like many other countries, the Lao PDR remains vulnerable to external shocks and has been severely affected by natural disaster, especially extensive floodings. Over the past years, our government has attached great importance to combating climate change through the implementation of the revised nationally determined contribution that clearly outlines ambitious targets of the national action for tackling and mitigating climate change toward achieving net zero emission by 2050. To this end, there is pressing need for adequate financial resources and technical support for gaining access to climate finance and other sources of funding to support developing countries, especially LDCs, LDC, and SEEDs, to achieve their development goals and commitment made under the Paris Agreement. In this regard, we call for renewed political will coupled with concrete action taken by international community in the upcoming COP27 to preserve our planet for many generations to come. Mr. President, having recognized multidimensional challenges and special needs of the group of countries in special situations, the Lao PDR is strongly committed to the implementation of the internationally agreed development goals and program of actions for LDCs and LDCs and LDCs and other UN development cooperation frameworks. The Lao PDR remains hopeful and firmly believes that multilateralism, with the United Nations as the lead institution, the multiple crises and challenges in the international community is facing can be appropriately addressed. We are strongly committed to supporting conflict resolution through peaceful means, guided by the UN Charter and other relevant international laws. We trust that development cooperation for common interests and shared benefits must continue to be at the core of international relations. Towards this end, more action-oriented solutions and non-politicized approaches must be adopted. It is our hope that this UNGA 77 will offer opportunities to enhance our solidarity and revive sustainable development path in order for us to ensure transformative solutions for better livelihoods of our people and planet. I would like to end my statement by expressing on behalf of the Lao government and people my sincere appreciation to all member states for the kind support for our membership of the ECOSOC for the period 2023-2025. We stand ready to humbly serve and make meaningful contribution to the work of ECOSOC, and we pledge to discharge our duties in advancing partnership towards a more resilient and sustainable world. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al viceprimer ministro y ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la República Democrática Popular Lao. Doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Don Pramudvinai, viceprimer ministro y ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Tailandia.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I would like on the outset to extend my warmest congratulations for your election as President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And this congratulations also go to your entire team of the presidency. Please rest assured of Thailand's full support as you undertake to fulfill your important mission. We are at the watershed moment. As an international community, and as the United Nations. We stand at a point where the decision we make and the actions we pursue can shape the world and shape the course of humanity for years to come. But we can only do it together, guided by our shared interest and based on mutual respect. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated the inequality gaps. It has reversed at least 4 years of development gains, according to the UNDP, and at a time when the world is trying to recover from the 2 years of pandemic, our problems are compounded with multiple challenges. We are seeing new conflicts on top of global geopolitical tensions. We are experiencing the food crisis, the energy crisis, and the financing crisis. These have had the most detrimental impact on those who are most vulnerable, that is LDC and the small island development states, the SIDS, and vulnerable groups such as women, girls, the elderly, and people with disability. Collective action is certainly needed now. Mr. President, the food crisis has affected us all. This global food insecurity stems from the conflicts, climate change disruption, to supply chain and uneven recovery from the COVID-19. There is thus an urgent need to strengthen multilateral action among like-minded partners, United Nations agencies, WTO, and international institutions in facilitating a constructive dialogue and improving policy coordination to address this crisis. It is certainly vital to keep our global supply chains open for seamless cross-border flows of food, fertilizer, and essential goods, by also making our food system more resilient so that equitable access to safe and healthy food for all can be guaranteed. Thailand is prepared to work in partnership with countries and international organizations to realize this vision. In this context, Thailand welcomes the Black Sea Grain Initiative, established by the United Nations to open a safe corridor for grain transportation that would help ease a global food crisis. This initiative further stresses the importance of international cooperation under the UN's framework in order to respond to new global challenges. In addition to overcoming food insecurity, we also need to overcome health insecurity. As we learned from the pandemic, good health for all is critical. And that's why universal health coverage should be a high priority for us all. We need to ensure access to quality essential health care services and access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for everyone. We must continue to promote and protect the right to the highest attainable standard of health as part of our commitment to human rights. We must continue to invest in promoting a more inclusive social protection system for all, as called for by the Secretary General in our Common Agenda report. To reinforce this, the global health architecture needs to be reformed, both structurally and functionally, to address the current shortcomings and systemic failures of health systems. And that's why Thailand fully supports the development of a legally binding international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and responses under the WHO. The new instrument must place equity at its heart to ensure self-reliance of developing countries when faced with pandemic, especially through enhancing their capacity to manufacture certain medical countermeasures. With better food and health security, we will be better positioned to putting the Sustainable Development Goals back on track. In doing so, a human rights-based approach is needed to ensure that the rights and basic needs of all persons are guaranteed, especially the rights and needs of those most vulnerable and furthest behind. This will help enhance our resilience and capacity to cope with the future crisis. SDGs serve both as a pathway and the end goals in ensuring survival of our present and future generations. As we have only 8 years left to attain the SDGs, we need to employ every tool at our disposal, from science, technology, and innovation to working in partnership at every level to drive this agenda forward. Because without sustainable development, there is no future. We need to promote North-South and South-South cooperation and the integration of 2030 agenda with other cooperation frameworks, both at the global and regional levels. And that's why ESCAP and ASEAN are working to enhance the complementarity between the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal agenda and the 2025 ASEAN vision. Thailand's hosting of the Global South-South Development Expo with ESCAP and the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation in Bangkok last week also demonstrates the importance we place on the development cooperation, especially among developing countries. Furthermore, financing for development and finding innovative sources of finance is key to the transforming SDGs from mere aspiration to reality for all. Thailand agrees with the Secretary General's proposal in promoting cooperation with lending or leading global financial institutions to mobilize finance to drive forward the SDGs while improving financial liquidity for least developed countries. And to promote sustainable development, Thailand has adopted the Bio-Circular Green Economy model, or BCG, as a means to achieve a more balanced development in this recovery phase. The BCG economy model utilizes science, technology, and innovation to encourage the optimization of resources for environmentally friendly economic growth. In pursuing sustainable development, we need to ensure balance between our people-centered approaches and protecting our planet. And to this end, Thailand is ready to work with the international community to contain the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Thailand is committed to promoting international cooperation for the protection of the environment, including on the negotiations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. In tackling climate change, Thailand stands firm in our pledge at COP26 last year to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2065. And without adequate support, Thailand will be able to increase its nationally determined contribution, or NDC, target to 40% while achieving net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. And this is not an empty promise. Thailand will submit our NDC and long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies that reflect those goals ahead of the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26 at Sharm el-Sheikh. Meanwhile, the pledges of developed countries must also be fulfilled. I urge this country to keep their promise of providing financial, technological, and capacity-building support to developing countries and to deliver on the climate finance goal of $100 billion USD annually as soon as possible. Equal attention should be paid on mitigation and adaptation. Thailand stands ready to work with Egypt and all partners at COP26 in this regard. Mr. President, we need to restore faith and confidence in the multilateralism and our United Nations. An important step to achieving this is to reverse the polarization at this body by working more closely on issues that bring us together. Addressing humanitarian concerns is one such issue. Thailand will continue to work closely with the international community, taking into account the needs of the affected country to address urgent humanitarian challenges through bilateral, regional, and multilateral efforts according to the key humanitarian principles without politicization. We have supported humanitarian work in Afghanistan through the World Food Programme and made contributions for Ukraine through the Ukrainian Red Cross and UNICEF. As for Myanmar, Thailand has worked on donation of 1 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines and through ASEAN. Financially, financial contributions were also made to support the work of international organizations such as UNICEF, WHO, WFP, and ICRC. As an immediate neighbor with the longest land border, 2,470 kilometers long, it is in Thailand's vital interest to see a quick return to peace and stability in Myanmar. We call on all parties in Myanmar to urgently undertake steps to de-escalate, end violence, and engage in meaningful talks to resolve differences peacefully. Thailand fully supports the constructive role of ASEAN and believes that ASEAN is best placed to help Myanmar through the time-tested ASEAN practice of consultation, cooperation, and consensus. Thailand will continue to play an active and constructive role to support this ASEAN process, as well as the role of Special Envoy of the UNSG on Myanmar. And as a strong believer of multilateralism, Thailand stands ready to continue to do its part to promote multilateral and international cooperation at all levels. Sustainable development and human rights are intertwined and mutually reinforcing. They are vital in ensuring an environment of peace and prosperity. Thailand hereby presents candidacy for the UN Human Rights Council, HRC, membership for the term 2025 to 2027. And if elected, we can help strengthen the Council and its mechanism to reach out to those vulnerable and those furthest behind, and to bring meaningful and real positive changes on the ground. Thailand also firmly believes that a close regional cooperation can complement the multilateral system and reinforce the global agenda. This year, Thailand plays host to Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, meeting under the theme of Open, Connect, and Balance. Such theme signifies the willingness to embrace every opportunity, connect in all dimensions, and balance in all aspects. This highlights Thailand's commitment in promoting multilateral cooperation that will hopefully lead to a more balanced and sustainable development after the COVID-19 pandemic. We look forward to welcoming the world leaders to Bangkok in November, as Thailand is fully open and ready to welcome visitors once again. Mr. President and distinguished delegates, despite the challenges and difficulties at this critical juncture in the history of humanity, Thailand continues to have faith in multilateral system with the United Nations at its core, and we remain confident that the goodwill and shared common interests of humanity will help us make the right decision at this watershed moment, so that we can move together towards a more stable, sustainable, and safer future with no person or country left behind. Now, let me add this very brief account to the end of my statement. A few days ago, a sentiment was expressed by the EU Foreign Policy Chief when he said, "Don't rule out the possibilities of the use of nuclear weapons at the Ukraine crisis." An Oriental saying has it, which could be related to this context. It pertains to the enjoyment of riding a beast, whether it's a tiger or the dragon. But let's put a tiger in this context. Riding the tiger back could be fun and challenging. But no one could enjoy riding its back with no end in sight. The question is how to dismount with safety without killing the tiger. Certainly, the question of how to is daunting. Here, we have a suggestion which has taken all elements into account and definitely not a realpolitik free. A possible breakthrough could be apparent during the month of November, as the third week of the penultimate month of the year offers a golden opportunity for all super stakeholders of the Ukraine crisis to assemble at 3 venues in South Asia as legitimate participants. The 3 venues, one in Phnom Penh for ASEAN Summit, another in Bali for G20, and the third in Bangkok, Thailand for APEC leaders meeting. They could separately or in a series serve as the most appropriate platform for talks to provide possible off-ramp or exit to this high-tension global crisis in Ukraine. The world body, UN, with all its relevant roles and mechanisms to help safeguard peace and stability, could certainly join in at any juncture to add value to these endeavors. So, let's hope that this golden opportunity is not passed up by all the superpowers, super stakeholders with regard to the high-tension Ukraine crisis. I thank you. Thank you very much.
Agradezco al viceprimer ministro y ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Tailandia. Doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Demeke Mekonnen Hassen, viceprimer ministro y ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Etiopía.
ክቡር የጠቅላላ ጉባኤው ፕሬዝዳንት፣ የተከበሩ የተባበሩት መንግስታት ድርጅት ዋና ጸሐፊ፣ የተከበራችሁ የሀገራችን መሪዎች፣ መላው ሰላም ወዳድ የዓለማችን ህዝቦች፣ ክቡራትና ክቡራን፣ ክቡር ፕሬዝዳንት የ77ኛው ጠቅላላ ጉባኤ ፕሬዝዳንት ሆነው ስለተመረጡ ለእርሶና ለሀገሮ ደስታዬን ልገልጽ እወዳለሁ። በተጨማሪም የ76ኛው ጉባኤ ፕሬዝዳንት ክቡር አብዱላሂ ሻሂድ ስላሳዩት አመራር ምስጋናዬን አቀርባለሁ። በዚህ ታላቅ ጉባኤ ሀገሬ ኢትዮጵያን በመወከል ንግግር በማድረጌ የተሰማኝ ደስታ የላቀ ነው። Mr. President, we are at a historic crossroads in the evolution of our multilateral system. Humanity is facing multiple and complex challenges ranging from climate change, extreme poverty of epic proportions, and live adverse socio-political impacts across the world. Nevertheless, international cooperation is not at a level near the gravity of the challenge Although climate change and the resulting extreme weather conditions occur throughout the globe, the crisis largely affects the minimally resilient and the least responsible for causing the problem. A case in point is our region, the Horn of Africa, which in some part is highly hit by record-level drought while sustaining extreme flooding in other parts. Mr. President, climate disaster and its insufferable impacts are preventable. I therefore make an urgent call to all states gathered here to translate rhetoric into action. We must realize our climate finance commitments to build resilience and mitigate impact. We should act to meet our emission reduction targets. This requires focused coordination, non-politicization, avoidance of securitization, and good faith cooperation among all stakeholders. I must emphasize, Africa is not responsible for the historic emissions that caused the climate crisis. Yet, we are the ones making the most tangible contribution to mitigate the impacts of climate change. In Ethiopia, our afforestation program, the Ethiopian Green Legacy initiative, saw the planting of billions of seedlings and created a strong culture of afforestation. We are also on a path to sustainable energy transformation and green growth. These proactive programs deserve recognition and tangible support. Mr. President, we have a shared planet and a common destiny. Overcoming our collective challenges require concerted efforts and trusted global leadership. We are gathered here because our forefathers, learning from the tragic episodes of human history, decided to establish the United Nations as the guardian of peace. However, we are yet to achieve true universality in the main organs of the United Nations. Africa has no permanent seats at the UN Security Council. Our quest for African solutions to African problems is yet to be given the respect and support it deserves. We believe these considerations underpin the credibility of the Council in the continent. African problems are sustainably addressed when approached in the true context of the region and take full account of the strategic interests and aspirations of the countries concerned. It is only when we do this and uphold regional solutions we could start reducing the proliferation and overextended study of African issues in the UN Security Council. Mr. President, for the past 4 years, Ethiopia has made significant progress in its socio-economic development and democratization. These years have also been compounded by challenges that tested our survival as a nation. In November 2020, the most heinous and treasonous attack was waged against the Ethiopian National Defense Force that protected not only the peace and stability of Ethiopia, but also helped keep peace in other countries on behalf of the United Nations and the African Union. The criminal group that remains hell-bent in destroying societal foundation of our country colluded with external actors opposed to our development aspirations. The insecurity this group created has been very tragic and costly. Yet, the government of Ethiopia has earnestly tried to avoid this conflict. Regrettably, our efforts to prevent the conflict from igniting were not successful. Thanks to the resolve and determination of Ethiopians, the designs of our adversaries against Ethiopia's progress have been frustrated. We have also paved a path for peace and recovery, relying on the ability of the peace-loving people of Ethiopia to reconcile, make peace among ourselves, and start the process of healing. We thus call for support to our agenda for peace, reconciliation, and reconstruction. We also urge respect for and support to the EU-led peace process. Any other approach, including the politicization of human rights and unilateral coercive measures, will not yield any positive outcome. Mr. President, the past year has also been a milestone for my country and, we believe, to the entire Nile River Basin. Our project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, commenced lighting our homes and fulfilling our intergenerational aspiration. All the glory and gratitude go to the people of Ethiopia who financed this project. The dividend goes far and wide to the entire region. Taking this opportunity, I reiterate Ethiopia's commitment to equity and cooperation in the use of transboundary rivers and shared prosperity with all riparian countries. We will continue in good faith the trilateral negotiation under the auspices of the African Union to reach a mutually acceptable outcome. Mr. President, over the past 3 years, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals encountered serious setbacks. The global COVID-19 pandemic has tested our health system. Global trade in goods and services was halted, causing a great deal of loss to our economies. The response by international financial institutions has been below the required level and did not account for the special vulnerability of least developed countries. As the Secretary General of the United Nations put it, it is necessary to turbocharge the implementation of the SDGs. We call for enhanced focus and support to national efforts to improve agricultural and manufacturing productivity, increase investment, facilitate technology transfer, foster fair trade, redouble debt cancellation, and restructuring and enhance international finance for national priority projects. Furthermore, we should enhance the efforts to combat illicit financial flows, unlawful extradition and trade of minerals, and corruption. Africa's youthful population and its vast natural resources should be a source of growth and better jobs. Africa can be the showcase for green and sustainable development. It can feed and power itself and the world. This requires reform of the global financial architecture to ensure more equitable, speedy, and collaborative cooperation based on the needs and potential of least developed countries. More importantly, we must actively support governments that work to create a conducive environment for the prosperity of their countries. In addition, Africa's effort to chart its destiny must not be complicated by big power competition. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by re-emphasizing the need to scale up international cooperation. The gravity of the challenge we face today demands us to come together in search of collective solution. We need more, not less, multilateralism. We shall continue to uphold our cardinal principles of independence, impartiality, integrity, non-interference, sovereign equality, and non-selective to maintain a working multilateral system rooted in the Charter of the United Nations. We need to reform our global institutions to reflect current realities. We need to make them more representative and responsive to the demands of the time. Only through genuine solidarity and concerted action could we ensure collective security and prosperity. I thank you all for your attention and wish you, Mr. President, a successful term of office. I thank you. አመሰግናለሁ።
Agradezco al viceprimer ministro y ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Etiopía. Doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Sergei Lavrov, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la Federación de Rusia.
Уважаемая госпожа председатель, уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа, мы встречаемся в непростой драматический момент. Кризисные явления нарастают. Положение в области международной безопасности стремительно деградирует. Вместо честного диалога и поиска компромиссов приходится иметь дело с дезинформацией, грубыми инсценировками и провокациями. Линия Запада подрывает доверие к международным институтам как органам согласования интересов и к международному праву как гарантии справедливости и защиты слабых от произвола. Негативные тенденции в концентрированном виде мы наблюдаем в стенах ООН, которая появилась на обломках германского фашизма и японского милитаризма и была создана с целью содействия развитию дружественных отношений между ее членами и предотвращению конфликтов между ними. Сегодня решается вопрос о будущем миропорядка. Это ясно любому непредвзятому наблюдателю. Вопрос в том, будет ли этот порядок с одним гегемоном, заставляющим всех жить по своим пресловутым правилам, выгодным только ему, или это будет демократичный, справедливый мир, мир без шантажа и запугивания неугодных, без неонацизма и неоколониализма. Россия твердо выбирает второй вариант, и мы вместе с союзниками, партнерами и единомышленниками призываем работать над его воплощением в жизнь. В прошлое уходит однополярная модель мирового развития, которая обслуживала интересы так называемого «золотого миллиарда», чье сверхпотребление столетиями обеспечивалось за счет ресурсов Азии, Африки и Латинской Америки. Сегодня становление суверенных государств, готовых отстаивать национальные интересы, ведет к формированию равноправной, социально ориентированной и устойчивой многополярной архитектуры. Однако объективные геополитические процессы воспринимаются Вашингтоном и полностью подчинившимися ему правящими элитами западных стран как угроза их доминирующему положению. США и их союзники хотят остановить маховик истории. Когда-то, провозгласив победу в холодной войне, Вашингтон возвел себя чуть ли не в ранг посланника Господа Бога на земле, у которого нет обязательств, а есть только священные права безнаказанно действовать как и где угодно. Зоной этих действий может быть объявлено любое государство, особенно если оно чем-то не угодило самопровозглашенным хозяевам мира. Мы все помним, как под надуманными предлогами были развязаны агрессивные войны против далеких от американских берегов Югославии, Ирака, Ливии, унесшие многие сотни тысяч жизней мирных граждан. Хоть в одной из этих стран разве были затронуты действительно законные интересы Запада? Разве там запрещали английский или языки других стран-членов НАТО? Запрещали западные средства массовой информации, культуру? Разве объявляли англосаксов нелюдями, применяли против них тяжелые вооружения? И каковы результаты авантюр США на Ближнем Востоке? Улучшение ситуации с правами человека и верховенство права, стабилизация социально-политической обстановки, рост благосостояния населения. Назовите страну, в дела которой силой вмешался Вашингтон и где в результате жизнь стала лучше. Пытаясь возродить однополярную модель под лозунгом порядка, основанного на правилах, Запад повсюду насаждает разделительные линии в духе блоковой конфронтации. Либо с нами, либо против нас. Третьего не дано, никаких компромиссов. Продолжая бездумный курс на расширение НАТО на восток, приближение военной инфраструктуры блока к границам России, теперь США поставили задачу подчинения азиатских пространств. На июньском саммите НАТО в Мадриде этот, как он сам себя называет, оборонительный альянс провозгласил неделимость безопасности Евроатлантики и Индо-Тихоокеанского региона. Под лозунгом индо-тихоокеанских стратегий создаются закрытые форматы, подрывающие всю складывавшуюся десятилетиями вокруг АСЕАН открытую и инклюзивную региональную архитектуру. В дополнение ко всему затеяли игру с огнем вокруг Тайваня, обещая ему к тому же военную поддержку. Очевидно, что пресловутая доктрина Монро обретает глобальный охват. Вашингтон пытается превратить весь земной шар в свой задний двор. Инструмент принуждения несогласных – незаконные односторонние санкции, которые долгие годы принимаются в нарушении устава и задействуются как инструмент политического шантажа. Цинизм этой практики очевиден. Рестрикции бьют по гражданскому населению, препятствуя получению доступа к товарам первой необходимости, в том числе медикаментам, вакцинам, продовольствию. Вопиющим примером является длящаяся более 60 лет американская блокада Кубы. Генеральная ассамблея давно и настойчиво, подавляющим большинством голосов, требует ее немедленной отмены. Генеральный секретарь, в чьи обязанности входит содействие выполнению решений Генеральной Ассамблеи, конечно, должен уделить особое внимание этой проблеме. Генеральному секретарю принадлежит особая роль и в мобилизации усилий по преодолению продовольственного и энергетического кризисов, разразившихся в результате бесконтрольной денежной эмиссии в США и ЕС во время пандемии и безответственных, непрофессиональных действий Евросоюза на рынках углеводорода. Вопреки элементарному здравому смыслу, Вашингтон и Брюссель усугубили кризисную ситуацию, объявив экономическую войну против России. В результате рост мировых цен на продовольствие, удобрения, нефть и газ. Мы приветствуем усилия генерального секретаря, способствовавшие заключению стамбульских договоренностей 22 июля. Однако эти договоренности надо выполнять. А пока суда с украинским зерном в большинстве своем идут далеко не в беднейшие страны, а созданные Соединенными Штатами и Евросоюзом финансовые и логистические препоны на пути российского экспорта удобрения и зерна так до конца и не сняты. Кроме того, мы уже не первую неделю напоминаем, что 300 тысяч тонн удобрений задержаны в европейских портах, и давно предлагаем передать их бесплатно нуждающимся странам Африки. Но Евросоюз не реагирует. Официальная русофобия приобрела на Западе беспрецедентные, гротескные масштабы. Там уже не стесняются открыто заявлять о намерении не только нанести нашей стране военное поражение, но и разрушить, расчленить Россию. Другими словами, добиться исчезновения с политической карты мира слишком самостоятельной геополитической величины. В чем же в реальности действия России за последние десятилетия ущемляли интересы оппонентов? Может быть, нам не могут простить, что благодаря позиции нашей страны стала возможна военно-стратегическая разрядка 1980-х, 90-х годов, или что мы в свое время добровольно распустили организацию Варшавского договора, лишив НАТО смысла ее существования, поддержали воссоединение Германии без каких-либо условий и вопреки позиции Лондона и Парижа, вывели вооруженные силы из Европы, Азии, Латинской Америки, признали независимость бывших советских республик, поверили обещаниям лидеров Запада не расширять НАТО ни на дюйм в восточном направлении. А когда процесс пошел, согласились его фактически легитимизировать посредством заключения основополагающего акта России и НАТО. Может быть, мы нарушили интересы Запада, предупреждая его о неприемлемости приближение угрожающей военной инфраструктуры вплотную к нашим границам. Аррогантность Запада, американская исключительность приобрели особенно деструктивный характер после завершения Холодной войны. Еще в 1991 году заместитель главы Пентагона Пол Вулфовец в беседе с командующим Объединенными силами НАТО в Европе Уэсли Кларком откровенно признавался в том, что, цитирую, «после окончания Холодной войны мы можем использовать наших военных, не боясь наказания. У нас есть 5, возможно, 10 лет для того, чтобы вычистить эти суррогатные советские режимы, такие как Ирак и Сирия, пока не появится новая сверхдержава, способная бросить нам вызов». Конец цитаты. Уверен, что когда-нибудь из чьих-нибудь мемуаров мы узнаем, как конкретно выстраивалась американская стратегия и в отношении Украины. Впрочем, планы Вашингтона и так очевидны. Возможно, нам никак не могут простить, что по просьбе Соединенных Штатов и Евросоюза мы поддержали договоренности тогдашнего президента Украины Януковича с оппозицией об урегулировании кризиса в феврале 2014 года, договоренности, которые были гарантированы Германией, Францией и Польшей, а наутро были растоптаны главарями кровавого госпереворота, унизившими европейских посредников. Запад лишь развел руками и молча наблюдал, как путчисты стали бомбить восток Украины, где отказались признать результаты госпереворота, как его организаторы возвели в ранг национальных героев нацистских приспешников, причастных к зверским этническим чисткам русских, поляков, евреев в годы Второй мировой войны. Мы что, должны были мириться с курсом Киева на тотальный запрет русского языка, образования, российских средств массовой информации и культуры, с требованиями изгнать русских из Крыма, объявлением войны против Донбасса, жителей которого и тогдашние, и нынешние киевские власти провозгласили не людьми, а существами, устами своего высшего руководства. Может быть, Россия нарушила интересы Запада тем, что сыграла ключевую роль в прекращении развязанных киевскими неонацистами боевых действий на востоке Украины, а затем требовала выполнения Минского комплекса мер, который был единогласно одобрен Советом Безопасности ООН в феврале 2015 года, но похоронен Киевом при прямом участии Соединенных Штатов и Евросоюза. Мы многократно на протяжении многих лет предлагали договориться о правилах сосуществования в Европе с опорой на принцип равной и неделимой безопасности, затвержденный на высшем уровне в документах Организации по безопасности и сотрудничеству в Европе. В соответствии с этим принципом никто не укреплял бы свою безопасность в ущерб безопасности других. Последнее предложение о необходимости сделать эти договоренности юридически обязывающими мы внесли в декабре 2021 года, на что получили высокомерный отказ. Недоговороспособность западных стран и продолжение киевским режимом войны против собственного народа не оставили нам иного выбора, как признать независимость Донецкой и Луганской народных республик и начать специальную военную операцию с целью защиты русских и других жителей Донбасса и устранения угроз нашей безопасности, которые НАТО последовательно создавала на территории Украины, по сути дела, на наших границах. Операция проводится во исполнении договоров о дружбе, сотрудничестве и взаимопомощи между Россией и этими республиками на основе статьи 51 Устава нашей организации. Уверен, что на нашем месте так поступило бы любое суверенное, уважающее себя государство, осознающее свою ответственность перед собственным народом. Сейчас Запад закатил истерику из-за проходящих в Лаосской, в Луганской, Донецкой, Харьковской и Запорожской областях Украины референдумов. Но проживающие там люди, по сути, лишь реагируют на то, что им в одном из своих интервью в августе прошлого года рекомендовал глава киевского режима Зеленский. Тогда он посоветовал всем, кто чувствует себя русскими, ради блага своих детей и внуков, уходить в Россию. Вот жители упомянутых регионов так сейчас и поступают, забирая с собой при этом свои земли, на которых столетиями жили их предки. Любому непредвзятому наблюдателю предельно ясно, для англосаксов, которые полностью подчинили себе Европу, Украина лишь расходный материал в борьбе с Россией. НАТО объявило нашу страну непосредственной угрозой на пути к тотальному доминированию США, а в качестве долгосрочного стратегического вызова определила Китайскую Народную Республику. Одновременно коллективный Запад во главе с Вашингтоном посылает всем без исключения остальным странам устрашающий сигнал. Следующим может быть любой, кто посмеет ослушаться. Одним из последствий объявленного Западом крестового похода против неугодных становится прогрессирующий упадок многосторонних институтов, превращаемых США и их союзниками в инструменты реализации своих корыстных интересов. Эта линия насаждается в ООН, ее Совете по правам человека, ЮНЕСКО и других многосторонних структурах. Фактически приватизирована организация по запрещению химического оружия. Предпринимаются яростные попытки по недопущению создания в рамках Конвенции по биологическому и токсинному оружию механизма обеспечения транспарентности сотен военно-биологических программ Пентагона по всему миру, в том числе по периметру российских границ и на всем пространстве Евразии. О том, что эти программы отнюдь не безобидны, свидетельствуют неумолимые факты, выявленные на территории Украины. Видим напористую линию на приватизацию секретариата ООН, внедрение в его работу неолиберального дискурса, игнорирующего культурно-цивилизационное многообразие современного мира. Призываем в этой связи уделить внимание, как того требует устав, обеспечению справедливого географического представительства государств-членов в структурах секретариата, не допуская засилья одной группы стран. Нетерпимая ситуация сложилась вокруг невыполнения Вашингтоном обязательств по соглашению между секретариатом и правительством США относительно обязательств страны-хозяйки центральных учреждений Объединенных Наций по обеспечению нормальных условий для участия всех стран-членов в работе ООН. Соответствующие обязанности этим соглашением возложены и на генерального секретаря. Инертность здесь недопустима. Не могут не беспокоить усилия отдельных стран, подрывающие прерогативы Совета Безопасности. Безусловно, и Советы в целом ООН должны быть адаптированы к современным реалиям. Видим перспективы демократизации работы Совета Безопасности исключительно, хочу это особенно подчеркнуть, исключительно за счет расширения представленности стран Африки, Азии и Латинской Америки. Особо отмечаем Индию и Бразилию как ключевых международных игроков и достойных кандидатов на постоянное членство в Совете при обязательном одновременном повышении профиля Африки. Сегодня как никогда важно, чтобы все государства-члены недвусмысленно, без оговорок, подтвердили приверженность целям и принципам Устава ООН в качестве первого необходимого шага на пути к восстановлению коллективной ответственности за судьбы человечества. Именно с такой целью в июле 2021 года была создана группа друзей в защиту Устава, соучредителем которой стала Россия, в которой уже входит 20 стран. Группа ставит своей задачей обеспечить строгое следование универсальным нормам международного права в противовес пагубным односторонним подходам. Призываем всех, разделяющих такую позицию, присоединиться. И в этом контексте существенным позитивным потенциалом обладают движение неприсоединения, БРИКС, Шанхайская организация сотрудничества, АСЕАН. Западные коллеги, агрессивно навязывая свое понимание демократии как модели организации жизни общества всем странам, категорически не хотят руководствоваться демократическими нормами в международных делах. Свежий пример – та же ситуация вокруг Украины. Казалось бы, Россия в деталях обосновала свою позицию, причем обосновывала ее несколько лет, и Запад провозгласил свое несогласие с нашей позицией. Ну, казалось бы, пусть остальные члены мирового сообщества сами решают, какую позицию им занять. За одних, за других или позицию нейтралитета. Вроде бы так положено в демократиях, когда противостоящие друг другу политики отстаивают свою точку зрения и агитируют население. Но США и их союзники не дают никому свободу выбора, Они угрожают и выкручивают руки каждому, кто осмелится мыслить самостоятельно, требуют угрозами присоединиться к антироссийским санкциям. У них это плохо получается, но очевидно, что действия подобного рода США и их сателлитов – это никакая не демократия, а чистой воды диктатура, по крайней мере, попытка насадить диктатуру. Создается устойчивое впечатление, что Вашингтон и покорившаяся ему Европа пытаются сохранить свою ускользающую гегемонию исключительно запрещенными приемами. Сплошь и рядом методы дипломатии подменяются незаконными санкциями против сильных конкурентов в экономике, спорте, информационном пространстве, культурных обменах и в целом в сфере контактов между людьми. Взять ту же проблему с визами для делегатов на международные мероприятия в Нью-Йорке, Женеве, Вене, Париже. Это ведь тоже стремление устранить конкурентов, не допустить альтернативные точки зрения в многосторонних дискуссиях. Уверен в необходимости защитить ООН, очистить Всемирную организацию от всего конфронтационного и наносного, вернуть ей репутацию площадки для честных дискуссий по поиску баланса интересов всех государств-членов. Именно этим подходом руководствуемся при продвижении в ООН наших национальных инициатив. Принципиально важно добиваться всеобъемлющего запрета на размещение оружия в космосе, на что нацелен российско-китайский проект международного договора, находящийся на рассмотрении конференции ООН по разоружению. Особого внимания требуют задачи защиты киберпространства, включая согласование в рамках рабочей группы открытого состава Генеральной Ассамблеи договоренностей о путях обеспечения международной информационной безопасности, а также разработку на площадке спецкомитета универсальной конвенции о противодействии использованию информационно-коммуникационных технологий в преступных целях. Продолжим оказывать поддержку Управлению по контртерроризму и другим антитеррористическим органам системы ООН. Будем и далее содействовать динамичному развитию отношений ООН с Организацией договора коллективной безопасности, Содружеством независимых государств, Евразийским экономическим союзом в целях сопряжения усилий на пространстве Большой Евразии. Россия призывает активизировать работу по урегулированию региональных конфликтов. Считаем приоритетными задачи преодоления тупика в деле создания независимого палестинского государства, восстановления разрушенной агрессии НАТО государственности Ирака и Ливии, нейтрализации угроз суверенитету Сирии, налаживанию устойчивого процесса нацпримирения в Йемене, преодоления тяжелейшего натовского наследия в Афганистане. Добиваемся возрождения в первоначальном виде совместного всеобъемлющего плана действий по иранской ядерной программе, обеспечения справедливого комплексного урегулирования проблем Корейского полуострова. Многочисленные конфликтные ситуации в Африке требуют отказа от искушения делать их предметом геополитических игр с нулевой суммой и консолидации внешних игроков в поддержку инициатив Афросоюза. Беспокойство вызывает обстановка в Косово, Боснии и Герцеговине, где США и Евросоюз упрямо ведут дело к разрушению международно-правовой базы, воплощенной в резолюции Совета Безопасности 1244 и в Дейтонском мирном соглашении. Госпожа председатель, в эпоху перемен человеку свойственно искать опоры и утешения в мудрости предшественников, на чью долю выпали не меньшие испытания. По меткому выражению бывшего генерального секретаря Дага Хаммаршельда, помнившего ужасы Второй мировой войны, я цитирую: «ООН была создана не для того, чтобы привести человечество в рай, а чтобы спасти его от ада». Эти слова как никогда актуальны. Они взывают к тому, чтобы все мы осознали свою индивидуальную и коллективную ответственность за создание условий для безопасного и гармоничного развития будущих поколений. Для этого всем необходимо проявить политическую волю. Мы готовы к такой честной работе и убеждены, устойчивость миропорядка может быть обеспечена исключительно через возвращение к истокам ООНовской дипломатии с опорой на ключевой уставной принцип подлинной демократии – уважения суверенного равенства государств. Благодарю вас.
Agradezco al ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la Federación de Rusia. Doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Sirojidin Muridin, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Tayikistán.
Distinguished Madam President, distinguished Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me join previous speakers in extending our congratulations to you, Ambassador Chaba Karoshi, on your election as President of the United Nations General Assembly at its 77th session. I wish to take this opportunity to pay a befitting tribute to your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, for his effective guidance and excellent leadership during the most challenging and uneasy times for the entire humanity. Excellencies, our world is going through turbulent times. We are witnessing the transformation of the existing world order. Threats such as terrorism, extremism, drug and arms trafficking, cybercrime, and other forms of cross-border organized crime have a tendency to increase exponentially. To further discuss the above-mentioned issues, the government of Tajikistan, the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, and its partners will be holding a high-level international conference on international and regional border security and management cooperation to counter terrorism and prevent the movement of terrorists in Dushanbe, Tajikistan on 18th, 19th October 2022. We invite you to attend this important conference. Climate change, natural disasters, food insecurity, ongoing impact of the pandemic, among other things, further add fuel to the fire. The international community needs tools that are fit for today's rapidly deteriorating environment. Mechanisms that were established decades ago are now finding it difficult to cope with the emerging challenges. The world needs more robust multilateralism to tackle and toughest challenges with the United Nations at the helm. Therefore, Tajikistan supports the efforts of the United Nations Secretary General aimed at comprehensive reform of the organization to strengthen its capacity to timely and adequately respond to the development needs and efficiently address contemporary threats. There is a historic opportunity to steer change in a direction beneficial for all humanity. It shouldn't be wasted. Mr. President, allow me to address 3 additional topics which are very important for my delegation: implementation of our Roadmap 2030 agenda, water and climate change, as well as peace and security. Tajikistan strongly reaffirms its commitments to the full implementation of the 2030 agenda and its sustainable development goals. As we are lagging behind of many SDGs, the government of Tajikistan has taken bold steps towards integrating SDGs into national policies and development plans. Despite substantial progress made towards the achievement of SDGs, there are significant risks such as climate-related hazards and disasters that could slow and reverse Tajikistan's path towards the realization of 2030 agenda and threaten agricultural productivity and food security. This year, the world has witnessed unprecedented water-related natural disasters. While we all have
struggling with the consequences of these water-related disasters, we are becoming increasingly aware that water is vital and a resource we must value, protect, and manage effectively. We need actions that can make a real difference. On 6th, 9th June 2022, we successfully held the second Dushanbe conference in Tajikistan, which became a key preparatory meeting for the midterm review of the water decade in 2023. As you are aware, in 22-24 March 2023, the United Nations will convene its second water conference after 46 years. The UN 23 Water Conference will be a good opportunity for all of us to review and evaluate the progress made and the gaps and obstacles we have encountered in realizing the goals of the water decade. Tajikistan and Netherlands, leading the preparations for this global event, are diligently working and are determined to make the conference a watershed moment for the whole world. To this end, we launched the Water Action Agenda as one of the outcomes of the UN 2023 Water Conference. We expect and encourage everyone to come to the conference with new commitments to enrich the Water Action Agenda. This is important and necessary not only for us today, but for our children, for our future generations. Mr. President, the impact of climate change on water resources is another crucial topic that requires our concerted efforts. Alongside the increase in mud flows and floods, water scarcity and droughts, and changes in the hydrological cycle, today the accelerated melting of glaciers, the primary sources of fresh water on the planet, is of great concern. To this end, Tajikistan is actively promoting an integrated approach to addressing water and climate issues, including within Water and Climate Coalition. During the coalition's first meeting, His Excellency Mr. Emomali Rahman, President of the Republic of Tajikistan, proposed declaring 2025 as an international year of glaciers preservation. We are currently working on the draft resolution to advance the said initiative through the Second Committee of the UN General Assembly. We seek your constructive engagement and support for this important resolution. Mr. President, response to the ever-increasing threat of terrorism and extremism should be comprehensive, with the UN as a key coordinator. For its part, Tajikistan has undertaken several measures in this direction. We have, among other things, adopted our national strategy and action plan of the Republic of Tajikistan on countering terrorism and extremism for 2021-2025 and expressed our readiness. Tajikistan strongly believes that small states should also have a greater chance to contribute to finding solutions for maintaining peace and security. Hence, following years of contributions to multilateralism through active participation in the United Nations activities and processes, and having unique peacemaking experience and insightful knowledge about Afghanistan, the time has come for Tajikistan to seek for the first time its non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for 2028-2029. We are looking forward to closely working with all the UN member states to gain the trust and support for this vital campaign. Mr. President, Tajikistan, a peace-loving country that went through a devastating imposed civil war, is very aware of its cost and long-lasting consequences. Therefore, we can't stay indifferent to the fate of our immediate neighbors, the noble people of Afghanistan, who have suffered enough for the past 40 years. They deserve peace and tranquility. Exactly 1 year ago, in this same room, the President of Tajikistan, His Excellency Mr. Emomali Rahmon, in his virtual message before the United Nations General Assembly, dedicated more than half of his statement to the situation in Afghanistan. His concerns and warnings, unfortunately, fell on deaf ears. 1 year after the fall of Afghanistan, no inclusive government has been formed despite repeated calls from Afghans, regional countries, and the international community for greater ethnic, political, and geographical diversity in the de facto administrative structures. The country is on the verge of a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. To ease the suffering of the Afghan people during these difficult times, Tajikistan has provided its infrastructure, territory, and communication means to all stakeholders and donor countries to deliver humanitarian assistance directly to the people of Afghanistan. We have also never stopped providing the people of Afghanistan with much-needed electricity since the Taliban came to power. The environment of intimidation and deterioration in respect for human rights, including the rights of women and girls, is overwhelming. Diverging opinions and existing internal contradictions within the Taliban and the emerge of additional armed opposition groups, including ISIL-K and other terrorist groups, make the security situation in the country even more fragile. Furthermore, Taliban's inability to control its militants and other terrorist groups further complicates the already difficult situation. The recent discovery and killing of one of Al-Qaeda's top strategic means in Kabul is a vivid testimony of those ties. Afghanistan is rapidly becoming a safe haven for terrorist groups and a springboard for spreading the Taliban's radical extremism. In addition, we are witnessing systematic work on transferring militant groups consisting of former nationals of Central Asia to the north of Afghanistan, aimed at consolidating and creating a new hotbed of tensions near our border. Unfortunately, the implications for Tajikistan, which shares 1,400 kilometers of border with this country, are enormous. In the current alarming situation, it is paramount for Tajikistan to strengthen its border with Afghanistan and create the necessary border infrastructure along its entire length. At the same time, we believe that the participation of Afghanistan in the process of multi-phased regional cooperation is a key to the success of the efforts undertaken by the international community. Mr. President, on 20 September this year, the leadership of the Kyrgyz Republic delivered his speech from this high rostrum, talked about Kyrgyz version of the conflict on the Tajik-Kyrgyz border. It is regrettable that the issue of settlement of the state border line between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which we inherited from history, are groundlessly raised at the UN General Assembly. I believe it is important to inform you that on September 19, 2022, the authorized representatives of the two sides signed the protocol on the settlement of the situation at the border. All hostilities have ceased. The troops and military equipment of both sides must be withdrawn to their places of permanent deployment. A joint inspection was organized in the border area. A joint task force has been set up to monitor the implementation of the agreement reached. Most importantly, both parties reaffirmed their commitment to resolving all bilateral issues exclusively by political and diplomatic means. Tajikistan has followed and will always follow this principle when any issues arise, including the settlement of the situation on the border. It is with deep regret that Kyrgyzstan is deviating from the agreement reached, creating a false appearance of withdrawing troops and heavy military equipment from the line of contact by hiding them in populated areas near the border. Therefore, the responsibility for any next round of tension on the Tajik-Kyrgyz border will lie exclusively with Kyrgyzstan. The leadership of the neighboring country in their speech mentioned the deaths of their citizens and financial damage, creating the false impression that the tragedy on the border affected them exclusively. The evidences say otherwise. As a result of military aggression of Kyrgyzstan, more than 40 civilians of Tajikistan were killed and about 200 were injured. The casualties include pregnant women, children, elderly, doctors, as well as devout Muslims, attendants of the mourning ceremony in the mosque. In addition to border facilities, schools, hospitals, religious buildings, residential buildings, infrastructure, and utilities were destroyed. So, who is the aggressor here? Tajikistan is currently channeling significant resources to rebuilding destroyed houses and vital infrastructure. The tragedy that happened in the border area is not accidental. Since the last autumn, our neighbors have been preparing for aggression, which manifested itself in the creation of military infrastructure near our borders. In recent years, our neighbors have often spoken, including from this high restaurant, about the importance of an international transport artery and the creation of favorable conditions for transportation, while advocating the removal of barriers to economic cooperation, the simplification of procedures for passing borders and transit between countries and regions. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan often creates problems for the transit of goods to and from Tajikistan, delaying vehicles with thousands of tons of our cargo. Mr. President, it's important to note that we managed to successfully resolve the border issues with China and Uzbekistan, and this is an achievement of lengthy process for all parties. We have accumulated enough experience, which is important to use in its entirety when resolving border issues on the basis of mutual respect, trust, and openness. Over the 20 years history of negotiations with Kyrgyzstan, we have signed dozens of protocols. However, as time passes with the change of political groups in power, they continuously revisit these documents and implement only those provisions that are in favor of them exclusively, while ignoring the other provisions. As of today, both countries managed to agree on and develop a draft description of about 602 kilometers of our joint border, which is approximately 61% of its total length. Tajikistan, relying on the international practice of border delimitation, has repeatedly offered its neighbors to record the results of these many years of work on paper by signing an agreement on separate sections of the border. But our neighbors strictly declined this proposal. The leadership of Kyrgyzstan mentioned in this high rostrum the agreement on the establishment of the Commonwealth of Independent States and the Alma-Ata Declaration, presenting them as a legal framework for determining the state border. However, I have to emphasize that the issue of determining the border line is not the subject of regulation of these documents. To our deep regret, relying on its unilateral approach, since 1950s, Kyrgyzstan has arbitrarily seized more than 2,110 square kilometers that rightfully belong to Tajikistan. Our neighbors didn't mention anything about it either. I would like to inform the General Assembly that Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have reached an agreement on the description of the state border line according to the documents of the National Territorial Delimitation of 1924-1927. It is these documents that have gone through all the constitutional procedures and accordingly are the only legal framework for continuing the negotiation process. Despite this, in order to show goodwill and maximum flexibility, we met our neighbor halfway and agreed to also use the documents of the 1989 Parity Commission proposed by Kyrgyzstan. Border issues are not resolved by the populist statements and the creation of crisis situation. We need daily, thoughtful, joint work based on the political will on the parties. We stand ready to continue negotiations and firmly believe that the Tajik and Kyrgyz peoples have the right to live and build together an atmosphere of peace, friendship, and harmony. Tajikistan, having survived the horrors of internal conflict, understands the value of peace and will make all its efforts to ensure that security and stability reigns in our region. I thank you for your attention.
Agradezco al ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Tayikistán. Doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Subramaniam Jaishankar, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la India.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the General Assembly, I bring to you the greetings of 1.3 billion plus people from the world's largest democracy. They join me in congratulating the President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Csaba Kőrösi, on his election to chair the 77th session of the UN General Assembly. They follow closely developments at the United Nations, reflecting the increasingly globalized nature of our existence. We meet at a challenging time for the world order. This session's theme, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges, seeks to capture its seriousness. Excellencies, the year 2022 is an important milestone in India's journey towards growth, development, and prosperity. India is celebrating 75 years of its independence, what we call Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The story of that period has been one of toil, of determination, innovation, and enterprise of millions of ordinary Indians. They are rejuvenating a society pillaged by centuries of foreign attacks and colonialism. And they are doing so in a democratic framework whose steady progress is reflected in more authentic voices and grounded leadership. This new India, under the visionary and dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is a confident and resurgent society. Its agenda for our centenary will be achieved through the 5 pledges that we committed to on our Independence Day. 1, we are resolved to make India a developed country in the next 25 years. For the world, that creates more capacities for global good. 2, we will liberate ourselves from a colonial mindset. Externally, this means reformed multilateralism and more contemporary global governance. 3, our rich civilizational heritage will be a source of pride and of strength. This includes care and concern for the environment, so ingrained in our traditional ethos. 4, we will promote greater unity and solidarity. This expresses a coming together on global issues such as terrorism, pandemics, or the environment. And 5, we will instill consciousness of duties and responsibilities. This applies to nations as much as it does to citizens. These 5 pledges affirm our age-old outlook that sees the world as one family. We believe that national good and global good can be entirely in harmony. It is this conviction that led us to supply vaccines to over 100 nations. Similarly, our evacuation operations in HADR situations always had room for other nationals in distress. Even as we meet our own development targets, India offers partnerships to our brothers and sisters in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. And we do so based on their needs and their priorities. Today, the focus is on green growth, better connectivity, digital delivery, and accessible health. Our solidarity is not just in words. You can see them in 700 projects across the world. Madam President, even while India contributes to global betterment, we recognize the sharp deterioration in the international landscape. The world is already struggling with challenges of post-pandemic economic recovery. The debt situation of the developing is precarious. To this is now added the rising costs and the shrinking availability of fuel, of food, and of fertilizers. These, along with trade disruptions and diversions, are among the many consequences of the Ukraine conflict. The Indo-Pacific, too, witnesses fresh concerns about its stability and its security. And climate events have added an overlay on these mounting anxieties. As we saw in the case of the COVID pandemic, the South will be the most impacted, even if the immediate causes are well beyond. It is imperative that global conversations recognize this deep unfairness. The inequity of vaccine distribution should not be replicated in other domains. Madam President, as the Ukraine conflict continues to rage, we are often asked, whose side are we on? And our answer each time is straight and honest. India is on the side of peace and will remain firmly there. We are on the side that respects the UN Charter and its founding principles. We are on the side that calls for dialogue and diplomacy as the only way out. We are on the side of those struggling to make ends meet, even as they stare at the escalating costs of food, of fuel, and fertilizers. It is therefore in our collective interest to work constructively, both within the United Nations and outside, in finding an early resolution to this conflict. Excellencies, while the global attention has been on Ukraine, India has also had to contend with other challenges, especially in its own neighborhood. Some of them may be aggravated by the COVID pandemic and ongoing conflicts, but they speak too of a deeper malaise. The accumulation of debt in fragile economies is of particular concern. We believe that in such times, the international community must rise above narrow national agendas. India, for its part, is taking exceptional measures in exceptional times. We do so when we send 50,000 metric tons of wheat and multiple tranches of medicines and vaccines to Afghanistan. When we extend credits of $3.8 billion to Sri Lanka for fuel, essential commodities, and trade settlement. When we supply 10,000 metric tons of food aid and vaccine shipments to Myanmar. When we fill the gap in humanitarian needs left unaddressed by political complexity. Whether it is disaster response or humanitarian assistance, India has stood strong, contributing particularly to those nearest to us. Excellencies, the world as we knew it is poised for transformational changes. It has been impacted in recent times by a succession of shocks, each of them significant by itself. The COVID pandemic called into question the over-centralized nature of globalization and has led all of us to seek greater resilience and reliability of supply chains. The repercussions of the ongoing Ukraine conflict have further heightened economic stresses, especially on food and energy. Climate events have added to disruption that the world is already facing. As for the promise of technology, it has certainly multiplied our capabilities, but also added to our vulnerabilities. Trust and transparency are legitimate expectations of a more digitized world. The quest to create a better global order would necessarily have to address all these issues. Among them, some are clearly more existential in nature and necessitate intense coordination by the international community. Climate action and climate justice are particularly noteworthy in this respect. In their pursuit, India has worked with partners on the International Solar Alliance, the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. We stand ready to support any collective and equitable endeavor to protect our environment and to further global wellness. Lifestyle for Environment, or LIFE, as declared by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Glasgow on the sidelines of COP26, is our homage to Mother Nature. India remains deeply committed to fighting climate change under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. We do so on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. We have announced our updated nationally determined contributions after COP26. Excellencies, India's steadfast commitment to South-South cooperation is by now well established and well recognized. Our approach is based on principles of mutual respect and national ownership with a commitment to sustainable development for all. As we begin the G20 presidency this December, we are sensitive to the challenges faced by developing countries. India will work with other G20 members to address serious issues of debt, of economic growth, food and energy security, and particularly of environment. The reform of governance of multilateral financial institutions will continue to be one of our core priorities. Madam President, India would be completing its tenure as a member of the Security Council this year. In our term, we have acted as a bridge on some serious but divisive issues confronting the Council. We have also focused on concerns such as maritime security, peacekeeping, and counterterrorism. Our contributions range from providing technology with a human touch to ensuring safety and security of UN peacekeepers. As the chair of the Counterterrorism Committee this year, India would be hosting its special meeting in Mumbai and New Delhi. I invite all member states to participate in it. We need to create a global architecture that responds to the new tech tools deployed against open, diverse, and pluralistic societies. Having borne the brunt of cross-border terrorism for decades, India firmly advocates a zero-tolerance approach. In our view, there is no justification for any act of terrorism regardless of motivation, and no rhetoric, however sanctimonious, can ever cover up bloodstains. The United Nations responds to terrorism by sanctioning its perpetrators. Those who politicize the UNSC 1267 sanctions regime, sometimes even to the extent of defending proclaimed terrorists, they do so at their own peril. Believe me, they advance neither their own interests nor indeed their reputation. India has always espoused a cooperative, inclusive, and consultative approach to international relations. We believe that multipolarity, rebalancing, fair globalization, and reformed multilateralism cannot be kept in abeyance. The call for reformed multilateralism, with reforms of the Security Council at its core, enjoys considerable support among UN members. It does so because of the widespread recognition that the current architecture is anachronistic and ineffective. It is also perceived as deeply unfair, denying entire continents and regions a voice in a forum that deliberates their future. India is prepared to take up greater responsibilities, but it seeks, at the same time, to ensure that the injustice faced by the Global South is decisively addressed. Our call is to allow serious negotiations on such a critical matter to proceed sincerely. They must not be blocked by procedural tactics. Naysayers cannot hold the IGN process hostage in perpetuity. In these turbulent times, it is essential that the world listens to more voices of reason and experiences more acts of goodwill. India is willing and able on both counts. We believe and advocate that this is not an era of war or of conflict. On the contrary, it is a time for development and for cooperation. Madam President, in the past, this august assembly has served as a meeting point of views and as a catalyst for action. It is vital that we continue to believe in the promise of diplomacy and the need for international cooperation. Therefore, Madam President, let us strive to return to the course of seeking peace, progress, and prosperity. I thank you.
Agradezco al ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la India. Doy ahora la palabra a la excelentísima señora Ann-Kristin Lind, ministra de Relaciones Exteriores de Suecia.
Madam President, Excellencies, times of crisis require the best of us. When warnings sound, action must follow. Only then will development have sustainable and pace maintained. Honest reflection on the gravity of the challenges must be followed by determined commitments to address them. That is what respecting the UN Charter means and what multilateralism is all about. Madam President, we are all aware of the immense task facing us. Almost 350 million people in more than 80 countries face acute food insecurity, trying to merely survive the day instead of making plans for tomorrow. Some 50 million people in 45 countries are on the brink of starvation. Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals is halting, leaving millions of women, men and children behind. Extreme poverty is on the rise for the first time in 2 decades. The world is in the midst of an accelerating climate and environmental crisis, and the effects on the ongoing pandemic continue to afflict individuals and in societies around the world. A permanent member of the Security Council has launched an unprovoked, unjustified and illegal aggression against a neighboring country. This was done in blatant disregard of its international obligation and the human suffering that extends far beyond the immediate war zone. Madam President, as UN member states, we also know what is required of us. The General Assembly has come together to demand that Russia immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized border. The General Assembly has reaffirmed Ukrainian sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. Today, Sweden reiterates this demand in the strongest possible terms alongside other EU member states, transatlantic partners and countries around the globe. The war in Ukraine must stop and Russia's troops withdraw. The fake referenda on Ukrainian territory would be illegal and will have no effect. Neither partial mobilization, the appalling use of nuclear threats, nor any escalation will deter us from supporting Ukraine. Humanitarian law and principle must be upheld, and Ukraine's nuclear power plants protected from Russia's illegal and reckless attacks. Accountability for the heinous crimes committed must be ensured. International law must be upheld and decisions by the UN bodies respected. Madam President, Russia's aggression has severely escalated the food security, energy and financial crisis. Governments and societies already struggling to cope with the consequences of climate change, conflicts and the pandemic now face even more serious challenges. Because of the actions of one country, more than 1.5 billion people in more than half of the UN member states find themselves at greater risk of poverty, starvation and indebtedness. In short, the global relief, recovery and resilience needs are immense. Sweden and the EU have scaled up our own contribution to meet them. To save lives and alleviate suffering when needs are the greatest, Sweden has increased its humanitarian assistance to a record high $950 million this year. We commend the efforts of the UN Secretary General and the President of Turkey on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Under the initiative, some 50,000 tons of wheat will, thanks partly to Swedish funding, soon leave the port of Odessa, bound for millions of women, men and children at risk of famine in Yemen. A significant part of Sweden's ambitious aid budget has been directed to the UN as an investment in global peace, security and development, and the multilateral system itself. Our actions are firmly anchored in the 2030 Agenda with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, which are now more important than ever. It is time to raise our ambition and accelerate action to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, or we'll fail not only future generations, but also our own. At the international meeting in Stockholm, +50 in June, countries came together to follow through on the recommendations and actions. Sweden has spearheaded the climate transition through innovation and green investments and an ambitious increase in climate aid. Mounting evidence show that climate change also leads to greater risks to peace and stability. A solid foundation for advancing climate security is in place at the UN and in regional organizations. The OSCE took key decisions last year during the Swedish chairpersonship, and the EU is scaling up. The nuclear threat is alarmingly present, and Russia's action over the threshold, in lowering the threshold, is a way that increases the threat that is facing us all. In January this year, the leader of all 5 nuclear weapon states committed to the prevention of nuclear war and avoiding arms race. They affirmed that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Russia's irresponsible action and nuclear rhetoric since then severely undermines the credibility of its commitments on this pledge. It is also deeply troubling that Russia broke consensus on the draft outcome of the NPT review conference. The countries of the Stockholm Initiative have presented ideas to head a call from the UN Secretary General to bring disarmament and non-proliferation back to the top of the international agenda. Madam President, the world is in a gender equality recession. Regrettably, the rights, resources, and representation of women still cannot be taken for granted. Violence against women and girls has increased. Access to safe and legal abortion has suffered major setbacks. And 1 year after the Taliban takeover, the situation for women and girls in Afghanistan has turned into a nightmare in an unparalleled system of discrimination. At the same time, more and more states are acknowledging that a gender perspective is needed to meet global challenges. As we gather for the first in-person UNGA high-level week since the outbreak of the COVID-19, we must do everything in our power to prevent another pandemic. Sweden and the EU have made substantial contribution to global vaccination. Last year alone, Sweden committed over $600 million to global health. The Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response has set out clear recommendations for action. We should make use of them. Madam President, a year ago, the UN Secretary General presented his blueprint for a modern multilateral system. Our common agenda is an accelerator of the SDGs, a launchpad for a new agenda for peace, and a way towards a more inclusive, modern, and networked UN. It was us member states who called for the report, and as member state, we should do our collective best to act upon it. The establishment of a new youth office is a fitting first decision. This is an agenda for the future. And the Transforming Education Summit earlier this week was another important step towards implementation. We look forward to similar progress on other recommendations, from investments in peace building and strategic foresight to digitalization and a global economy that benefits all by being fair and open. We must keep up the momentum until we realize our ambitions at the Summit for the Future in 2024. Madam President, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has caused the greatest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. aggravating the already serious refugee situation globally. This military invasion of a country in our neighborhood, in violation of the very same international law that is protected us all from aggression, has also fundamentally changed Sweden's security environment. In response to this seriously deteriorated security situation, the Swedish government decided on the 16th of May to apply for NATO membership. The decision has broad national support and was made following extensive consultation among political parties. It was taken in tandem with Finland, and the decision is anchored in a firm belief that security is best built together with others. When I signed our formal request for the NATO membership, I noted the fundamental changes to our defense and security policy. But I also stress the importance of the continuity of an ambitious global and multilateral foreign policy. This enduring global commitment is also reflected in the common foreign and security policy of the EU. During the first half of 2023, Sweden will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union. We look forward to further strengthening the EU's global role and deepening cooperation with partners around the world. We will work to protect, promote, and defend democratic principles, human rights, and the rule of law. And we reinforce the already solid EU-UN relationship to seek multilateral solutions. We lend our full support to Denmark's candidacy to serve as an elected member of the UN Security Council in 2025 to 26. Their campaign message, equality, security, action, is a message from all the Nordic countries. Madam President, it must be safe to work for peace, security, development, and human rights. So far this year, there have been 176 attacks against humanitarian workers, and 47 have been killed. More than 50 peacekeepers have lost their lives while serving in UN missions. A few months ago, the UN Secretary-General and I inaugurated a work of art in this very building in memory of Zaida Catalan and Michael Sharp, who were murdered while working in the UN in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In too many countries, civil society representatives, human rights defenders, and journalists are threatened, subjected to violence, or even killed for expressing their opinions or reporting on current events. The global trend of democratic backsliding must be reversed, and the vicious circle of lack of democracy, disrespect for human rights, and disregard of the rule of law broken. Investing in democracy means investing in peace and sustainable development. Efforts must continue to bring clarity to the circumstances of the death of the former Secretary-General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, and his crew. We fully support the work of the UN-appointed independent investigator. Madam President, to echo the topic of this debate, we are at a watershed moment. We are witnessing a full-scale war in Europe. Across the globe, armed conflict and repression cause suffering and halts development. We are not doing enough to tackle the climate crisis. Too many people are facing hunger, being forced to flee from their homes, dying from curable diseases, and living in fear or under oppression. We, the United Nations, must make sure there is a different story to tell next year. It won't be easy, but it is possible if we head to call to meeting interlocking challenges with transformative change. If we act when warning sounds. Thank you very much.
Agradezco a la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores de Suecia. Doy ahora la palabra al excelentísimo señor Nikolai Milkov, ministro provisional de Relaciones Exteriores de Bulgaria.
Distinguished Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in unprecedented times of many challenges: war and insecurity, energy and food crisis, climate change, still existing consequences in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemics. And this list of challenges is far from being complete. The abruptly increased security risks and the tectonic instabilities that occurred since the last UN General Assembly session are threatening to destroy the rule-based world order, an order that has been built here, in this hall, by all of you, by sovereign states and by the peoples of the world. For this reason, at the present UN General Assembly session, the majority of the speakers by far perceive as the biggest security risk the war that the Russian Federation wages against its neighbor, breaking basic international rules and the UN Charter itself. This illegal military aggression, carried out by a permanent member of the Security Council, not only undermines global security, but also puts the international rule-based order in jeopardy. Bulgaria is deeply concerned with the recent escalation of the conflict and the partial mobilization announced by the Russian Federation. We reject the ongoing sham referenda in occupied Ukraine and consider them neither free nor fair and without any binding force. In this unfortunate circumstances, each and every contribution for achieving more stability and cooperation among states in different regions must be encouraged and welcomed. As a Southeast European country, Bulgaria attaches utmost importance to the peace, stability and prosperity in the region of the Western Balkans. We are confident that the transformative power of the EU integration process and the inclusive regional cooperation are both the most powerful tools for achieving a common space of democratic governance, market economy, and political, economic, and social sustainability. We will continue to support these countries on their path to the European Union. Bulgaria is concerned of the lack of progress in the efforts to advance the Middle East peace process, as well as the recent escalation of tensions in the Gaza Strip. An enhanced cooperation between international and regional partners is needed for providing political horizon for the resumption of bilateral Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. A negotiated and viable two-state solution that allows both Palestinians and Israelis to live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders is essential for stability of the entire Middle East. Bulgaria is following with concern the critical developments in Afghanistan, including the human rights situation and the restrictions imposed by the Taliban on the rights of women, on girls' access to education, and on journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, the war in Europe has global repercussions. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has caused food insecurity and energy crisis that have devastating socio-economic impacts on the countries worldwide. The global food system has already been under pressure even before, due to factors as climate change and COVID-19 pandemic. However, this crisis escalated dramatically because of the war, and disruptions in food, energy and financial systems in over 90 countries around the world have put 1.7 billion people in risk. Bulgaria highly appreciates the UN-Turkey mediated deal on the resumption of grain exports from Ukraine's Black Sea ports and fully shares the assessment that this very welcome development has the potential to alleviate significantly the current food crisis. Notwithstanding, the situation still remains critical and the need for humanitarian assistance to a number of countries in the global south persists. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, some 2.5 years ago,
we were faced with the first lethal pandemic of the 21st century, which changed our lifestyles, the way of doing business, and above all, the way we communicate with each other. The COVID-19 pandemic also triggered a revolution in human online activities and interaction through different digital communication platforms. It also caused huge quakes in both societies and economies, deepened the gap between the rich and poor, applying to both people as well as to entire nations, wiped out at least a decade of progress made in reaching the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Our planet is visibly suffering from the devastating effects of climate change, deforestation, desertification, weather extremes, environment degradation, loss of biodiversity, affecting in one way or another each and every one of us, no matter where we live. Action is urgently needed. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are deeply concerned about the humanitarian and food crisis in Africa, especially in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions, further exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They come as an additional burden on post-COVID recovery efforts. In this context, specific and comprehensive responses are needed, addressing short-term needs of the countries concerned, as well as strengthening their resilience and sustainability. Therefore, we commend the efforts of both the UN and the African Union to address those challenges. Dialogue and cooperation with the countries from the Indo-Pacific region is becoming particularly important. Bulgaria supports the strengthening of partnerships with like-minded countries from the region in energy connectivity, digitalization, people-to-people contacts, security of supplies, security and defense, countering disinformation, etc. As the country holding the presidency of ECOSOC, now we attach great importance to the priorities of emerging economies with regard to sustainable development, as well as to the priorities of the small island states, taking into account their specific needs, including their existential struggle with the impact of global warming and the constant rise of sea level. I would like now to share with you on another very important and pressing issue. The world finds itself at a watershed moment for human rights as it faces numerous challenges in this regard. Neither peace nor prosperity can be meaningful concepts without the full respect for human rights and human dignity. We are a staunch supporter of the universality and indivisibility of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Being an active member of the Human Rights Council in 1219-1221, Bulgaria firmly promoted the rights of the child, of women and girls, as well as their empowerment. Gender equality and the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities are also key priorities for my country. Strongly committed to further advancing the human rights agenda worldwide, Bulgaria has presented its candidature for Human Rights Council membership during the period 2024-2026. Education is a basic human right with a transformative power to foster a fairer and more inclusive world. Education is a solid foundation for future peace, tolerance, and sustainable development. Over the last couple of years, the COVID-19 pandemic further limited the access of children to education in the developing world. This motivated my country to play an active role in the preparation of the Transforming Education Summit, and we are encouraged by the successful outcome of this event. Let me now briefly turn on to the UN reform in the three closely interrelated areas: governance, peace and security, and sustainable development. We cannot be complacent with the pace of reform so far, and we must seize the historic wave of opportunity to make strides in the process. Therefore, Bulgaria supports acceleration of the reform efforts in line with the proposals in the report of the Secretary General, Our Common Agenda, aimed at reaching a new global consensus on our future and stepping up the multilateral cooperation to achieve it. We support the comprehensive reform of the Security Council. We have come to a critical juncture where further keeping the status quo is untenable. The present situation, when the highest UN body fails to play its key role under the Charter, cannot be tolerated by the international community, and this is a duty we owe to the future generations. Allocating at least one additional non-permanent seat in the reformed Security Council to the Eastern European Regional Group remains a priority for my country. During the 77th session, Bulgaria is strongly committed to its financial obligations to the United Nations and is concerned about the persisting liquidity challenges which undermine the ability of the organization to implement its mandates and to carry out its approved program of work. We will continue to support the Secretary General's policies to improve the financial situation of the United Nations. Bulgaria consistently ranks among the member states that have contributed on time and in full to both the regular and UN peacekeeping budgets. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude by sharing with you our vision of the way ahead. We will have to navigate through uncharted waters. If we build upon the consolidated and unanimous approach of upholding the principles and the provisions of the UN Charter, we may exit the present crisis, but a long way to the re-establishment of the security and the economic stability will follow after the war. The world of tomorrow will be very different from what we expected it to be just not so long ago. Whether we will be up to the challenge will depend on our unity, on our ability to act together and as one, to mitigate the negative side effects and readjust our lives to the new realities in the world and withstand the rule-based multilateralism with the United Nations at its core. Thank you very much.
I thank the caretaker Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria. I now give the floor to His Excellency Sameh Hassan Shukri Salim, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد شابك خورشي رئيس الدورة 77 للجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة، أتوجه إليكم بالتهنئة على توليكم رئاسة هذه الدورة، راجيا لكم التوفيق في أعمالها. سيدات والسادة، تنعقد الدورة الحالية للجمعية العامة في مرحلة تاريخية دقيقة تشهد فيها الساحة الدولية أزمات بالغة التعقيد والتشابك، تتطلب لمواجهتها عملا جادا يتم فيه تفعيل الدبلوماسية متعددة الأطراف وعلى رأسها منظمة الأمم المتحدة. ففي الوقت الذي لا يزال العالم يعاني فيه من التبعات الهائلة لجائحة الكوفيد-19 وما سببته من تداعيات جسيمة، جاءت الأزمات الجيوسياسية المتلاحقة لترفع من حدة التوتر الدولي إلى مستوى غير مسبوق. من هذا المنطلق وفي هذا الظرف الدقيق تطرح مصر رؤيتها للواقع الدولي وسبل مواجهة التحديات التي يشهدها عالمنا اليوم. فبداية، ما زالت المنظومة الأممية تواجه تحديات العمل خارج إطارها، ورغم ما تمتلكه إذا توفرت الإرادة، من قدرة على صياغة موقف دولي فاعل يدعم الحفاظ على أمن والاستقرار الدوليين ويعزز تنمية وازدهار شعوب العالم. وأنه من الأمور التي تدعو إلى الأسف تبدد الأمل التي كان معقود على بلوغنا في القرن 21 عالماً يسود السعي لتحقيق الاستقرار ونبذ التوتر وإرساء نظم دولية قائمة على احترام قواعد القانون الدولي، لنتفاجأ بتوجه متنام نحو الاستقطاب وتزكية المواجهة والصدام بدلاً من التكامل لتحقيق المصلحة المشتركة، أو حتى التنافس على أسس قواعد عدالة بما يسهم في ارتقاء البشرية بأسرها. إن الافتئات على عمل المنظمة الأممية لا يقف عند حدود العمل خارج إطارها، بل يمتد أيضاً إلى اعتماد معايير مزدوجة في التعامل مع الأزمات المتشابهة. فما يتم تقبله من أزمة ما يعتبر مرفوضاً في أزمات أخرى، وهكذا أصبح القصور ليس في المنظومة الأممية ذاتها ولكن في إرادة أطراف تلك المنظومة. وإن كنا نجتمع في شهر سبتمبر من كل عام في هذا المحفل الدولي الجامع، فإنني أدعو المجتمعين في الدورة الحالية إلى احترام المنظومة الأممية وتفعيل عملية تجديدها وإصلاحها، وهي عملية لا يتعين أن تبقى دون إنجاز أو تكون بلا نهاية، بل يجب أن تتم بجدية وموضوعية وإنصاف حتى تصبح الأمم المتحدة أكثر قدرة على التجاوب مع التحديات التي نواجهها، وأكثر مرونة في تلبية مطالب واحتياجات شعوبنا. وفي هذا الصدد تؤكد مصر تمسكها بالموقف الأفريقي من إصلاح مجلس الأمن طبقاً لتوافق أوزلويني وإعلان سرت. سيد الرئيس، إن اندلاع الأزمة الروسية الأوكرانية قد فاقم من حدة الأزمة الاقتصادية التي يعاني منها العالم منذ انتشار جائحة الكوفيد-19، ومع استمرار الآثار السلبية التي خلفتها الجائحة والتطورات الجيوسياسية المتلاحقة، باتت الدول النامية تواجه تزايداً متنامياً في أعباء الملقاة على عاتقها، لا سيما فيما يتعلق بأزمة الديون السيادية وتفاقم العجز في الموازنات العامة. ومن ثم أصبح من الضروري أن تتجاوب الدول المتقدمة مع مطلب إطلاق مبادرة عالمية بين الدول الدائنة والمدينة تهدف إلى مبادلة الديون وتحويل الجزء الأكبر منها إلى مشروعات استثمارية مشتركة تخلق المزيد من فرص العمل وتسهم في تحقيق نمو إيجابي للاقتصاد. سيدات والسادة، ينبئ الواقع الراهن بوضوح عن أن المفهوم السائد للأمن الدولي بات أقرب إلى نظام توازن القوى منه إلى نظام الأمن الجماعي، وأصبحت البيئة الدولية صراعية وليست تعاونية، الأمر الذي يحتم علينا العمل على تعزيز روح التوافق الدولي لضمان أمن جميع الدول دون تهديد أو تقويض لسلامتها وأمنها. إن التحديات الدولية الراهنة أصبح منها ما يهدد وجود الدولة الوطنية ذاتها من جراء التدخل في شؤونها الداخلية وعدم مراعاة خصوصية مجتمعاتها، مما يؤدي إلى إضعاف كيان الدولة بل وأحياناً إلى تمزيقها، بما يفسح المجال لتنظيمات ما دون الدولة من جماعات إرهابية وميليشيات مسلحة لتتحكم في مصائر ومقدرات الشعوب، وهو أمر يتعين أن ينتهي لصالح تمكين مؤسسات الدولة الوطنية من القيام بدورها على الأصعدة كافة، بما يفضي كذلك إلى صون وتعزيز الأمن والسلم على المستوى الدولي. السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، تتعدد الأزمات في الواقع الدولي وتتشابك لتحدث تأثيرات مضاعفة، من أبرزها أزمة الأمن الغذائي التي تعد ناتجاً لسنوات طويلة من إخفاق المجتمع الدولي في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة، لا سيما ما يتعلق بالقضاء على الجوع وتحقيق أمن الغذاء، وكذلك نتيجة لتفاقم الأزمات الاقتصادية والجيوسياسية الأخيرة. وأشير في هذا السياق إلى واقع مؤسف، وهو أنه في إفريقيا فقط يواجه 1 من كل 5 أشخاص خطر الجوع، وتظل القارة مستورداً صافياً للغذاء بتكلفة سنوية قدرها 43 مليار دولار. ومن هنا فإننا نشدد على ضرورة التعامل مع تلك الأزمة بطرح استراتيجية متكاملة تستهدف أسبابها الجذرية، وذلك من خلال تطوير نظم الزراعة والغذاء المستدامة، وتلبية الاحتياجات العاجلة للدول النامية المستوردة للأغذية، وضمان مشاركة منتجاتها في سلاسل الإمداد دون عوائق، لا سيما من خلال تطوير ونقل التكنولوجيا الزراعية. كما نؤكد أهمية دعم أنظمة الإنذار المبكر حول انعدام الأمن الغذائي، وتعزيز إمكانات تخزين وتوريد الحبوب. وفي هذا الصدد فإن بلادي من خلال موقعها الجغرافي الفريد تعلن عن استعدادها للتعاون مع المجتمع الدولي من أجل إنشاء مركز دولي لتخزين وتوريد وتجارة الحبوب في مصر، إسهاماً في صون الأمن الغذائي العالمي. السيد الرئيس، إن دورة الجمعية العامة الحالية اتخذت لها عنوانا يعكس فهما عميقا لما بات يعانيه عالمنا من أزمات وتحديات، ولا شك إن هذا العنوان، البحث عن حلول جذرية للتحديات المتشابكة، ينطبق أكثر ما ينطبق على أزمة تغير المناخ. إن مصر بصفتها رئيس الدورة القادمة لمؤتمر دول الأطراف في اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية لتغير المناخ تتوجه بنداء صادق لكافة أعضاء الأسرة الدولية: دعونا نضع تعهداتنا والتزاماتنا موضع التنفيذ، وندعم الدول النامية والأقل نمواً في جهودها لمواجهة الآثار المدمرة لتغير المناخ، فهي الأكثر استحقاقاً واحتياجاً لذلك، إعلاءً لمبدأ الإنصاف والمسؤوليات المشتركة متباينة الأعباء. ومن ثم فإننا نتطلع خلال مؤتمر أطراف تغير المناخ الذي تستضيفه مصر بعد أسابيع إلى الخروج بنتائج تسهم في الإسراع من وتيرة التنفيذ على كافة الأصعدة، لتأكيد التزام المجتمع الدولي تجاه جهود مواجهة تغير المناخ، بما في ذلك خفض الانبعاثات ورفع القدرة على التكيف والتعامل مع الخسائر والأضرار الناجمة عن تغير المناخ، والأهم رفع طموح تمويل المناخ والعمل على تنفيذ تعهد مضاعفة التمويل الموجه إلى التكيف وتوفير 100 مليار دولار سنوياً، وكذلك الانتقال العادل إلى الطاقة الجديدة. إن قدرة المجتمع الدولي على المضي في تنفيذ أهداف باريس، وخاصة هدف وقف الارتفاع في معدل درجات الحرارة العالمية، ترتبط على نحو وثيق بالخروج بنتائج ملموسة في مؤتمر شرم الشيخ، بما يؤكد لشعوبنا إن مواجهة تغير المناخ لا تزال تحتل موقع الصدارة على قائمة أولويات الدولية رغم كافة التحديات التي يواجهها عالمنا. وتؤكد مصر في هذا الإطار أنها لن تدخر جهداً في توفير جميع الظروف المواتية لتحقيق ذلك. السيد الرئيس، يظل الأمن المائي أحد أهم التحديات التي تواجه عالمنا اليوم، لا سيما في منطقة الشرق الأوسط والقارة الأفريقية، التي تقع بعض دولها في أكثر مناطق العالم جفافاً وتصحراً. والمؤسف في هذا الأمر أن هذه المعاناة الإنسانية الجسيمة قد لا تكون بالضرورة بسبب نقص الموارد أو تراجع كميات الأمطار فحسب، ولكنها قد تعود بالأساس إلى عدم الالتزام بأحكام القانون الدولي ورغبة بعض الدول المنبع في الاستئثار بالموارد المائية، بما يحرم دول الممر والمصب من نعمة إلهية ممنوحة لخير الجميع وليست حكراً على شعب دون آخر. ويخطئ البعض الذي تصور أن التمسك بتطبيق الوسائل السلمية لتسوية المنازعات المائية يأتي من قبيل الضعف، بل إنه ينبع من القوة وقدرة على صون الحقوق وحفظها من الضياع أو التفريط، وإدراك مسؤول للآثار السلبية للصراعات على الشعوب قبل الحكومات. وفي هذا الإطار فإن مصر التي تقر بحق الشعب الإثيوبي في التنمية وما زالت على مدار ما يتجاوز عقداً كاملاً متمسكة بضبط النفس، تؤكد أن ذلك لم ولن يعني أبداً التهاون في حق الشعب المصري في الوجود الذي ارتبط بنهر النيل منذ فجر التاريخ مهداً للحضارة وشرياناً للحياة. إنني أؤكد على ضرورة التوصل دون تأخير أو مواطلة إلى اتفاق قانوني ملزم بشأن ملء وتشغيل سد النهضة الإثيوبي طبقاً للاتفاق إعلان المبادئ الذي أبرمته الدول الثلاثة مصر والسودان وإثيوبيا في مارس من 2015 بالخرطوم، والبيان الرئاسي لمجلس الأمن الصادر في 15 من سبتمبر 2021. فهذه الدول الثلاثة ذات سيادة ويتعين أن تلتزم بما اتفقت عليه وأن تنفذه فعلا وليس قولا، ومساهمة في الحفاظ على السلم والأمن الدوليين. فإن مصر تدعو المجتمع الدولي ممثلا في منظمة الأمم المتحدة ومجلس الأمن والدول الفاعلة على الصعيد الدولي إلى العمل على تطبيق قواعد القانون الدولي ذات الصلة صونا لمصير وحقوق 250 مليون مواطن مصري وسوداني وإثيوبي. السيدات والسادة، إن التوصل إلى حلول نهائية للأزمات جوارنا الإقليمي يظل ركنا أصيلا في بناء منظومة دولية آمنة ومستقرة. وفي مقدمة ذلك تأتي ضرورة التوصل إلى حل تفاوضي عادل ودائم وشامل للقضية الفلسطينية على أساس مقررات الشرعية الدولية وحل الدولتين، بإقامة دولة فلسطينية على حدود 4 يونيو 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، مع وقف أي إجراءات إحادية من شأنها تغيير الحقائق على الأرض وتقويض فرص الحل النهائي. وانطلاقا من مسؤولية مصر في مساندة أشقائها، فإنها تواصل جهودها الداعمة للحلول السياسية بموجب المرجعات الدولية في كل من سوريا ولبنان واليمن والسودان، بما يحفظ وحدة وسلامة وسيادة مقدرات هذه الأقطار الشقيقة وينهي التدخلات الخارجية في شؤونها. وفي هذا السياق تستمر مصر في دعم جهود الأشقاء في ليبيا لإنجاز الإطار الدستوري حتى يتسنى إجراء الانتخابات الرئاسية والبرلمانية بالتزامن في أقرب وقت على ضوء انتهاء المرحلة الانتقالية. وتثمن مصر في هذا الصدد دور البرلمان الليبي المنتخب، كما تشدد على أهمية خروج جميع القوات الأجنبية والمرتزقة من ليبيا وحل الميليشيات المسلحة في مدى زمني محدد، بما يسهم في استعادة ليبيا لاستقرارها المنشود. لقد عانت منطقتنا طويلا وآن لها أن تتخلص من كل هذا العناء وأن تعلي مصالح شعوبها على نزاعات التفرد بالسلطة وحيازة الثروة، وتضع حداً لكل من يسعى إلى أن ينال من وحدتها أو يهدد أمنها القومي. سيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، قبل أن أختتم حديثي إليكم أود أن أشير بشكل خاص إلى ما يمثله التضامن من قيمة أساسية نحن أحوج ما نكون إليها في واقعنا الراهن. ولعل في تخصيص الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة يوما دوليا للتضامن الإنساني في 20 سبتمبر من كل عام دليلا على أهمية تشجيع المبادرات الجديدة للقضاء على الفقر وللاحتفاء بالوحدة في إطار التنوع، وهو ما يدلل على الاهتمام الذي توليه المنظمة الأممية للتضامن كقيمة لا غنى عنها، ليس فقط للمساهمة بفاعلية في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة، ولكن أيضا لمواجهة التحديات الناشئة ومعالجة التفاوتات في مستويات التقدم الاقتصادي. فقيمة التضامن ستظل مبعثا للأمل ونورا للرجاء وثقة في غد أفضل لن يتحقق إلا ونحن جميعا معا يدا واحدة تبني وتعمر وتدفع الشر والسوء عن شعوب طواقة للتعايش والتعاون معا تحت راية الإخوة الإنسانية. شكرا لكم وأرجو لنا جميعا دورة موفقة.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the last speaker in the general debate for this meeting. The 13th plenary meeting to continue with the general debate will be held immediately following the adjournment of this meeting. This meeting is adjourned. And the 13th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Before proceeding further, I would like to remind members that masks are to be worn by all attendees at all times when indoors, except when directly addressing a meeting. We shall now continue the general debate. I now give the floor to His Excellency Ceyhun Aziz Oglu Bayramov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan.